we have now witnessed something which is highly unusual. And that is that yesterday, which was Sunday, Netanyahu was voted out of office after 12 years. And Naftali Bennett, together with Lapid, have now taken over the government, which is really something, actually, it's quite sensational. And I mentioned before, what we see is therefore many miracles have taken place. Most people don't realize that. But there are many miracles. I mean, the first miracle is that Bennett was not able to pass the threshold a while back. So he was out totally. And all of a sudden, miracle is that he actually came back. And it was really predicted that he would get 13 seats, but instead he got 7. So that itself was incredible, that he only got 7 seats, not 13, you see. Which meant that he, even if he joined Likud, he could not fulfill 61 seats for the Likud to be victorious. But what is even more astounding is that with his 7 seats, he actually became prime minister. Whoever heard of something like that? That somebody with only 6 or 7 seats becomes prime minister? That's unheard of. Especially Lapid, he had 17 seats. And I heard that if the election was held today, he may even get 23 seats if it was held again. But in any case, the fact that he's able to be a prime minister with only 6 or 7 seats is a ness. I wonder if he understands that. But another ness is that Lapid, together with Lieberman and the left, Meretz and Labor, all of them acquiesced to Bennett being prime minister, which is really astounding when you think about that. Now, I had mentioned certain ideas last time of what this is that we see, therefore, that the Erev Rav, and these are the Erev Rav, those Jews that want to, transform Judaism from a religion that worships God to a culture, just like every other nation. That's basically what the position or the platform of an Erev Rav is. But like I say, what is remarkable is that they now rule the Jewish people. And, it's important to understand. What we do see, which I had mentioned, is that there is somebody who is Orthodox, seemingly Orthodox, Naftali Bennett, who is now head of the government, which means that he is actually over the Erev Rav. That's very interesting. And that could be, as I mentioned last time, one of the stages of the removal of this mixed multitude, which is the Erev Rav. But anyway, the question is, what's happening and why? Why is it that the Erev Rav, have now succeeded in evicting Netanyahu, who's also basically an Erev Rav, but these people are much worse? Why is it that they have succeeded in this way? What we do see is that there's a simultaneous descent of darkness into darkness, both in the hands of America, in terms of Biden, and now, of course, in the hands of the Jewish people, Israel, in the hands of Bennett and Lapid. That's the question. So something obviously is going on here. It's not like this happened in America only. No. It's happened in America and Israel. So they seem to be joined in many ways, that whatever decree is issued for America is certainly issued for the Israel. And the question is, how do we begin to understand all this? That's a very important idea. So that's what I'd like to talk about, where we seem to be holding in a messianic process. A very important idea concerning the redemption is that there has to be darkness before the Geula. That means tremendous amount of evil dominates. There's an enormous amount of lack of good and a lack of wisdom, you see. And therefore, the truth is destroyed or disregarded, ignored. This is the tremendous darkness that precedes the Geula or the redemption. Now, how do we see this? Well, there are different sources for this, but it's really obvious. First idea is that it says in Bereshis, right? It says Bereshis Bor Elokim, in the beginning God created, Es HaShemayim v'Ha'oretz, right? The heavens and the earth. And then it says V'Ha'oretz Hoyis Asoyi V'Voyu, and the earth was unformed and void or empty, right? Ruach Elokim Merachefes al Pnei Hamoyim, okay? And then it says V'choshech al Pnei Zoim, and there was darkness on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovers over the waters. Now we know that there was darkness, so really the Spirit of God hovers in the midst of the darkness over the waters, and then God says, "Vayom Elokim Yehiyo," let there be light. Now there's a Baal HaTurim, very important commentary on the Chumash, that says that what is this Ruach Elokim that hovers over the face of the deep? So he says that the gematria, the numerical equivalent of that statement of Ruach Elokim Rachefes, is equivalent to this statement in terms of its numbers, gematria. What is that? Zuhi Ruchai Shomelech HaMashiach. This is nothing more than the spirit of the Messiah, the Mashiach. Therefore we see that the Mashiach hovers, or the Neshama of the Mashiach hovers in the midst of the darkness, because there was darkness, right? In the midst of the darkness, over the face of the deep. And then God said, "Let there be light." That means right before Mashiach comes, there will be tremendous darkness. And that's what it means, that the Mashiach hovers in the midst of the darkness before God says, "Let there be light." So that's one place where we see clearly that there will be tremendous darkness before the redemption. Then, of course, we know there's what's called the Toichacho, which is the admonishment that the Ribono Shel Olam gives to the Jewish people in different places of the Torah, the Chukosai, and so on. And it says there that it will be at the end of days when all these things will have passed, all the tremendous amounts of sufferings and agonies and punishments and so on, and so on, that God will come and He will take you back and so on. So that is really the darkness, the tremendous techochos, which is the admonitions, you see, curses, whatever you want to call them, that this will occur before the redemption. Then in the Gemara it says, that there are different Amoraim, great scholars. One of them, Rabbi Yochanan, and he says, "Yesei, let the Mashiach come. Lo yechmine, I don't want to see him." Which means that the suffering in the darkness, Choshech, will be so great that Rabbi Yochanan says, "I don't want to be around, even though the Mashiach is coming. I don't want to be around to see him." That's how disturbing that darkness will be. And we know many places in the Talmud, in the end of Sotah and so on, and in Sanhedrin and Chelek, where it talks about the fact that before Mashiach comes, there's going to be all kinds of terrible things, which is, of course, the darkness, right? So the question is, why is that so? Why does there have to be darkness? Now, what we begin to realize is this is it. This is Naftali Bennett, Lapid, Lieberman, Meretz, Labor, and that whole crew. You see, this is the darkness. And as we will see, that this is the darkness, really, that precedes the end. So do not wonder why they have won the government of Israel, because that is the ultimate darkness, where the left has come back to reclaim victory over good. Therefore, what we begin to see is that that is the last darkness before Mashiach comes. Now, the question is, why is there darkness? And there are different reasons why. All of them is to satisfy the tikkun, means to make sure that the universe or the entire world has what's called a rectification, a correction, where God can come back. Now, point one, the reason why there's darkness, as I pointed out, well, certainly a while back, is that it depends how the Mashiach comes. If the Mashiach comes as a result of merits, where the Jews do tremendous good, right, tremendous mitzvahs and so on, then there is no suffering. There is no darkness that precedes the Mashiach. But if the Jews do chayom, that's kulam zakoyim, which the Gemara says, all of them are righteous. But if the Jews do kulam chayom, in the sense that everybody's sinning, then the Mashiach will come through darkness. Question is why? Because the problem is that if the Jews are sinning, so that furthers, distances the tikkun, the rectification, you see. So therefore what is required is a tremendous amount of yisurin, or suffering, in order to satisfy the judgment. In other words, to balance the books. Because as long as the Jews don't deserve the Mashiach, right, then how can he come? And certainly how can he be here? You see. So that's the first idea, you see. And we actually saw that, as I said, in Egypt. When Moshe Rabbeinu came to Egypt, and he was the Goyal, he was the closest candidate to Mashiach, right? And that's because the Jews, as I said before, had entered Mem Teshari Tumah. They had descended to the 49th level of Tumah, defilement. So in order to save them from descending into the 50th, in which case they could not be redeemed because they would be completely saturated with that defilement, God had to save them. So he did. He sent Moshe Rabbeinu, who was the Mashiach, basically, almost, you see. And that way he could make sure that they wouldn't descend. But as I said before, the problem is that if the Mashiach comes to save the Jews, because they had descended into the Memtes, right, at Egypt, right, the Sultan, who's the major prosecutor, is standing there and saying, wait a minute, they don't deserve the redemption. So as a result of that, God has to balance the debt. So what happened? Pharaoh, we know, Paroi, issued a decree that they now had to gather straw. In other words, they were not given straw to make bricks. They had to gather it themselves, which means that they would have to go at nighttime all through Egypt at night. And there's no light bulbs, obviously, to gather straw, which caused enormous amount of suffering to the Jewish people. But that suffering would remove the claim of the Sultan against the Jewish people. And that satisfies the din, you see. So that's why there has to be darkness, certainly in the form of tremendous suffering and persecutions by a nation against the Jews. So that's a basic fundamental reason. And we know that this world has entered Mem Teshari Tumah, that this world has entered the 49 gates of defilement. That's how bad everything is. And we know that. Can't believe what's going on in this world, you see, and so on, And that's why this happens, the darkness happens. after the Mashiach comes, before the real, complete redemption. You see, there's another reason why it happens, and this is reason number 2. Because the problem is that even though they're suffering, right, they're adding to the suffering because they're also sinning. And when Jews sin, right, they have free will. And when a Jew sins and he has free will, automatically the Satan grows in enormous strength. That contributes tremendously to his strength, which we know is called the Zoyamah. So therefore, if there's going to be darkness, right, that means that there will be a tremendous lack of knowledge of what is right and wrong. There will be a tremendous environment of sin. And therefore, the amount of free will that a person has is substantially reduced, thereby reducing the culpability of that person. And therefore, if he's not as culpable as if there was a great deal of light, truth, then obviously the amount of power that the Satan takes, called the Zoyamah, is substantially reduced. You see? So in that sense, the darkness before the Geula substantially reduces the culpability of the Jewish people, that even if they sin, since it's a sin in tremendous darkness, where they don't know what's right or wrong, and so on, as a result of that, they really do not have the free will, because they are not aware of the option, of the choice. And as I said, therefore their culpability in committing the sin is tremendously diminished, and therefore that diminishes the Zoyamah, the energy that the Satan could take as a result of their sins, and therefore whatever sufferings they do go through, right, is works sufficiently to remove all of the Zoyamah, all of the justice that demands that they suffer, you see. And that's a very important reason. And that is why darkness must precede the Geula. If the Jews are sinning, God must diminish their culpability or their guilt, and therefore reduce tremendously the Zoyamah that the Satan will get as a result of that. You see, that is why, a very important reason why there's a tremendous lack of religion, of Ruchniya, spirituality, tremendous lack of Torah, you see, which is what we see, that most of the Jewish people are gone. There's a tremendous amount of evil in the world, which obviously we see, because all of that means that the culpability, the guilt of the Jewish people is substantially reduced. And that means, therefore, that you don't have to have as much suffering, since the sin is not counted really as a sin. So really, when you think about it, so then you can say to yourself, wait a minute, if that's what happens, so then who's doing the tikkun? Because they're not doing the tikkun, and the answer is the religious. They do the tikkun. Why? Even though the amount of Zoyamah they produce is also reduced, but nowhere near the other group, you see. And they do the tikkun because they have free will. The reason why they have free will is because they know exactly, what's right and wrong, what is a mitzvah and what's an avera. You see? So therefore, when they do a mitzvah, that advances the tikkun. You see? So the ones who really have the who are in charge of the process of tikkun are the Bnei Torah, right? And the religious Orthodox Torah-observant community. They're the ones, you see. And this follows from what I've said, you see. Now, so this is as I said, the second idea of why there's a tremendous amount of darkness. The third idea, which is also very important, that one of the blockages of the Mashiach coming is the fact that the Erev Rav have a merit. They have schus, or schut, however you want to say it. Why? Because if a goy or an Erev Rav contributes to Torah, And that is what they do in Israel. The government gives them money. But when they have the schus, in whatever degree of Torah, they are therefore rewarded, you see. And part of the reward is that they have a tremendous domination, you see. And that's very bad, because if they have a merit, how do you get rid of these guys? Because they have merits that protect them, you see. So therefore, what the darkness does when it envelops everybody, especially when the Erev Rav dominates, then that merit that they have to exist and survive and to dominate the religious, that disappears. So when you think about it, Lieberman wants to destroy the Torah in Klal Yisrael, you see. Actually, in a certain sense, that's very good. I mean, it sounds very bizarre what I'm saying, but the problem is that as long as the government of Israel contributes to the Limud Torah, that gives them a protective merit, and therefore it's very difficult to dislodge them, you see. So that's also part of the darkness, you see, where even the Erev Rav will no longer contribute to the Torah. You know, when you think about it, you realize they have no idea. They are committing suicide. They have no idea. They don't realize that their entire power to survive and to dominate is only because they contribute to the upkeep of Torah by giving money to yeshivas, kollel, Jewish education for kids, etc. And then if they remove that, they actually remove their protective shield against their own destruction. It's astounding when you think about that, you see. But that's a third reason, you see, for the darkness that precedes the Mashiach. Now, the fourth idea is that because the Torah diminishes, because the amount of money diminishes and the ability of Torah, you know, to be proliferated in the Jewish people, then everybody has to exert what's called Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice, to a much greater extent to learn the Torah. So that enormously increases their merit to survive, you see, and that enormously increases the possibility that the Tikkun will be complete and the Mashiach will come. You know, as it says, L'fum Tsaro Agro, the Gemara in Brochos says, L'fum Tsaro, that what determines the amount of merit, agro, reward, is the difficulty, the struggle that one has to go through. And that's the Fum Tsaro Agro. The Fum Tsaro, according to the Tsar, the struggle, the pain that a person has to sacrifice, agro is the reward. The reason for that, by the way, very important concept, is because the entire purpose of a mitzvah is to testify, Enod Mavadoi, that besides God, there is nobody else. You see, and every mitzvah does that because it's a battle of wills. You know, is it your will or God's will? And when you do a mitzvah, you express the fact that it's God's will that has primacy or supremacy. See, now, therefore, if you want to intensify the concept of Enod Mavadoi, right, then it comes out that the greater the struggle that you have in doing a mitzvah, and you overcome that struggle and you do the mitzvah, that means your testimony that Enod Mavadoi, besides God, there's nothing else, is much greater in intensity because your struggle is greater, and therefore you have to deny your own will. You see, in other words, the greater the struggle to do a mitzvah, that means when you do the mitzvah, it's a much greater statement of Enod Mavadoi, that His will has complete supremacy over yours. Therefore, your testimony that Enod Mavadoi, that God is the only one that exists, is much greater, and therefore the reward is obviously much greater. That's why struggle is such an important determinant in the amount of reward, because the amount of reward is not just from the mitzvah, it's also the struggle for the mitzvah, you see, because the greater the struggle, and you overcome that struggle, the greater is the reward that you receive. So, if you think about it, in darkness, right, the struggle is much greater, because the whole world is enveloped in evil and darkness, where the truth is completely concealed, you see? And you still do a mitzvah? You still believe in God, emun and bitochen, belief and trust in God, which is much more difficult in a time when everybody's abandoning God and religion. Therefore, the reward is much greater, you see. And that greatness of the reward, the amount of reward is so great that it can actually fill up the amount of tikkun left. So isn't that interesting? That the darkness itself increases the merit, right? And that merit itself, right? That statement of Einod Milvadoi with a much greater intensity increases the reward, and that reward can actually bring the tikkun itself. You see, so there you have it. I mean, there are other reasons, but those are basic 4 ideas of why it gets so incredibly dark. You see. Now, why is it that the Erev Rav are the people that bring the darkness? If you think about it, the Erev Rav, right, the mixed multitude, that's what they're called, and I mentioned those are the Jews that are not interested in religion or ruchnis or spirituality. They see Judaism, right, as a culture, just like every nation. The reason why they are the ones that create the darkness, which is what they do, and I mentioned, I think, was it last week, that 1.5 million kids in the public schools in Israel hardly have any Jewish education at all. In fact, they once said to these people, Shema Yisrael, what completes the statement? And most kids had no idea what goes after Shema Yisrael, Hear O Israel. It's astounding. But what's even worse is that the ones now in charge of this chinuch system, if you want to call it that, right, are the Reformed, you see. It's the Hartman Institute. They are the ones in charge. And they are destroying the youth. Could you imagine 1.5 million kids have no concept of Judaism? And this is the future generation of Israel. So the question is, why does the Satan use the Erev Rav? And the answer is very interesting, because as you come toward the end of time, you see, then the Jews will have removed from the Satan 98% of his energy, which he gets when the Jews sin, right? That's what he does. When the Jews sin, then they give the power of energy that comes down because of the Torah, the mitzvahs. It goes to the Satan when they sin, you see, and that's called Nitzotzes Kedusha, sparks of holiness. So therefore, at the end of time, the ones who have it, basically, are the Jewish people. Now, the Satan who's dying, because 98% of his energy is gone, he has to go to the Jewish people to get those sparks of holiness, because they are no longer in his hand. Since the Jews have taken most of it back, they are now in the hands of the Jews. So he has to now go to the Jews to energize himself with those sparks. So who does he go to? He goes, of course, to the Erev Rav, right? Because they, as Jews, have them, you see, which is really incredible. And that is why you see the Erev Rav in the end of time dominating and being responsible for the tremendous darkness that will envelop the Jewish people. You see, that's a very important idea. But like I mentioned before, the worse they get, the more power the Erev Rav has, the schus that they have to survive will again be taken away. So in like I said before, in many ways they are committing suicide. They have no concept that the Torah that they are trying to deny the Jewish people, the Bnei Torah, right, the kollels, the yeshivas, and so on, all the Bnei Torah, that without that they will be open to annihilation. And that is really what's happening. And therefore that is why we have a tremendous amount of darkness, you see. And these are really, in many ways, many important ideas. Now, what is also interesting is as darkness increases, you see, then there's much less mitzvahs done. And obviously there's much less Torah. Comes out an interesting idea, Kabbalistically, that a great deal of Shefa, and this is what produces this darkness, right? The great deal of diminishment of the energy of the spheres is tremendously reduced. So a lot of malachim, great malachim, that are responsible in many ways of bringing the Torah to the Jewish people on a spiritual level, they are annulled. They actually are out of a job, because darkness means that they do not bring the Torah to the Jews, and so on, and therefore they have to wait in line. They themselves need a geula in order to resume their position, you see. Now, so these are the ideas of darkness, and we actually see it being fulfilled with the left, Bennett and Lapid and all the other parties on the left, which, when you think about it, is an incredible, it's sort of like good news and bad news. The bad news is these guys are going to try to destroy, Torah, religion, Judaism, and the Haredim and whatever, and so on. That's the bad news. But the good news is they're wiping themselves out with this darkness that they want to bring in also. Now, what is also important to know is that the concept of Golus, as I said, why there is darkness before the end. But the whole concept of Golus, exile, is very important. And there are different stages, as I mentioned in the previous year, in the whole concept of exile, you see, where the exile begins, in their own country with evil kings, and then it progresses, to nations that want to persecute them, and then it progresses where they themselves are kicked out of Israel, and then after that, nations now begin to persecute the Jews, you see. So therefore, the exile itself, the purpose of that, as I had mentioned in the previous year, is for the purposes of bringing the tikkun, you see. Now, one of the things that help the Jews survive is that the divine presence itself goes into Golus. That's right. If the Jews went into Golus, which means is that they are denied their Torah, a great deal of their ruchnius, their spirituality. In many ways, they cannot survive. So therefore, what the Rebbe Hashem does is he allows his divine presence, his Shekhinah, to also go in Golus. What that means is that the Satan not only can take from the sparks of the Jews, but he can also take from the energy of the divine presence. And that's the concept of Shechinta Bigalusa. You see, that the Shekhinah itself is in exile. That means that God voluntarily allows, of course, he's not compelled, but he voluntarily allows the Satan to take from the Shekhinah itself, not merely from the sparks of holiness that should go to the Jews. And as a result of that, justice is satisfied, you see. And in many ways, historically, these are the two things that go into Golus. The Jewish people, as I said, and the divine presence itself that allows the Jewish people to survive in the Golus, you see. And in a certain sense, which is interesting, that has allowed two major events in history to occur. The first time is the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. That means that the divine presence went into Golus when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. The question is, of course, where do you go? Where does divine presence go? So I answered that. Shechinta B'Galusa means that the divine presence is in Golus, you see, and therefore the Satan can take from that divine presence the energy of the divine presence and therefore try to destroy the Jews. Well, the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed 2,500 years ago. That's a very long time ago. And therefore, the Satan was able to yoinek, that's what it means, to nourish from that divine presence. As a result of that, so therefore, it was enormously energized. Now the question is, now what? So what? What does Satan want to do? Daven Shmona Esrei? Because of all the spiritual energy? The answer is, of course not. What the Satan does is he exacerbates the exile itself. What does that mean? Well, if you notice, 2,500 years ago, the major religions were founded at that time. For instance, we find that Buddhism, he lived around then. There are hundreds of millions of Buddhists. Not only him, but also Taoism. Mao Tse, he also lived at that time, you see. He also lived Confucius. So there are three major religions in the East: Buddhism, Taoism, right, and Confucianism, right? They all emerged at that time, 2,500 years ago, when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. Not only that, but Rome became a republic in 525 BCE. So Rome also emerged as a nation that was destined to destroy, ultimately, the second Beis Hamikdash. So the question is, what does that mean? And the answer is fascinating. That means a Satan who's yoinek, who nourishes off the divine presence, because that's what happened when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. Where did God go? He went into what's called the Klippa. He went into, or he was, the God allowed his Shekhinah, that energy, to be subjugated by the Satan. And therefore the Satan took the image of God, which is a religion, from the Jews, and he gave it to the Goyim. Therefore it comes out that their religions are really usurpations, you see, theft from Judaism. Because Judaism itself is what? Has its image of God, its belief in a one God. So the Satan is able to take that and give it to the Goyim in the form of other religions, you see, which of course is idolatry. So therefore it comes out that when the divine presence goes into Gullus, therefore major religions can emerge, because that's what the Satan does. In other words, if we lose the image of God, right, because we sin, which is what we did, and that's why the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, then God allows himself, right, to be nourished by the Satan, that now offers a major religion to the Goyim. And not only that, but Roman Empire was founded in 525 BCE. They also now have the energy to become a great nation. You see, so that's a very important idea of what the Golos does. The second event, which I want to describe, is the second Beis Hamikdash. And the second Beis Hamikdash, we know, of course, was destroyed, right, because of Sinas Chinam, or Lashon Hara, based on the Chavetz Chaim and the Mashal. In any case, it was destroyed, but that would be the same thing, where the divine presence allows the Satan, right, because the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, and now the Shekhinah again goes into the Golos. You see, and therefore, what God now allows is that the Satan is able to take from, and of course it's all voluntary, because that's what justice demands, to be yoinek, to nourish off the divine presence. But we know what the formula is, that if the divine presence itself goes into the Klippa, which means into the dominion of the Satan, what that also means, right, is that the Satan can take the view that the Jews have of God and give it to the Goyim. Well, the question is, what emerged, or what major religion emerged, right, when the God went into the Klippa after the destruction of the second temple? And the answer, of course, it's Christianity. That happened right around the time of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, you see. So it's an amazing idea when you think about that, and you realize that Christianity is really Judaism on its head. It's really what it is. I mean, we say that we have the Torah. They say that they have the Torah, which is the New Testament, right? We say that we have the Messiah. They say that they have the Messiah, you see. So in many ways, we say that we are the nation of Israel, God's chosen people, and they say, which is called replacement theory, they say that they are the house of Israel. So it's astounding that Christianity is really Judaism stolen from the Jews. In fact, that's really what Christianity is. It's really Judaism with a pagan veneer, you see. And this is what they took once the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, and the Satan was able to give them a view of God, which is what we have. The Satan is able to give them a different view of God as a result of the fact that God also went into the Gullus. You see, and all of this is obviously a very important concept. Well, we now see much greater logic what's happening with Bennett and Lapid. We look at it and we say, this is terrible, which of course it is. Because why should the Jews be in a situation where in order to satisfy justice, right, they have to suffer this way? But I'm showing you the logic of why it's critical that this happens. All of this is to enable the Jews to survive and to bring the tikkun, to do the rectification, and not only that, but to bring the Mashiach. All of this is messianic. Don't be fooled. It's all it is. You see, and I explained why. Darkness is needed before the Mashiach comes, for the reasons that I have enumerated. And we are watching now, actually, the greatest intensity of darkness, because they, Bennett and Lapid and his whole party, they are really on a vendetta mission against the Haredim and really to destroy Judaism. They're going to try to, play around with conversions, which is terrible, because they are going to destroy the yichus, the lineage of the Jewish people. And they don't realize that they're harming themselves tremendously. Because imagine if somebody wants to get married and they converted through a reformed ceremony and they think they're Jewish, right? Then all of a sudden they want to get married, right? And let's say they get married that way. Now, thinking that they're Jewish, right, let's assume as time goes on that they do tshuva. And all of a sudden, right, they decide, well, they would like to marry a ben Torah, somebody who's immersed in learning Torah, or a Torah-observant Jew, right? What this is going to necessitate is the Jewish Haredim are going to have to check the lineage status of anybody getting married. So that person that thinks he or she is Jewish will be rejected. And they'll be stunned because they think they're Jewish. But as soon as you check the lineage status of who converted them, and it's found out that the Reformed or Conservative converted them, they're out. Could you imagine the shock that they will be in? So by destroying the concept of halakhic conversion, they are destroying themselves. So that's the first idea. Then they want to tamper with marriage, and divorce. Now, marriage, if somebody, of course, you need kosher witnesses to view the marriage, and that's the essential thing that makes the marriage. Could you imagine witnesses that are desecrate the Shabbos, and they are witnesses because it's a reform ceremony? So it comes out that the guy and the girl are not married. So it's one thing to understand that, so they're not married. So they're living as, man and whatever you want to call it, man and girlfriend or whatever and so on. You see, but at least the children of that marriage are basically, if the woman is Jewish, will be Jewish. But what about Gittin? Could you imagine if they go to two people are married, right? Right, a man and a woman, and they go to a reformed ceremony to dissolve the marriage, and the guy gives a get, whatever that's called, right? Meanwhile, of course, it means that they're still married according to the Torah. Meanwhile, this woman, let's say, right, goes and marries somebody else. But she can't. She's an Ashes Ish. So it comes out that if she marries a second husband, right, and they have a child, that child is a mamzer. So could you imagine how many mamzerim they will be bringing in Israel because they will have usurped the whole process of Gittin, right, as an anti-Torah position? Terrible. Then, of course, they want to, touch Shabbos and try to remove Shabbos from public transportation, you see. And there are many Jews that don't want to work on Shabbos. And if they don't work on Shabbos, they will lose their job. So it comes out that many Jews will be employed and they'll have to work on Shabbos, you see, which is terrible desecration. Because the Shabbos, Shmir Shabbos, not only does it hold the Jewish people together, but it holds the whole state of Israel together. That's one of the most holiest mitzvahs of the entire Torah. Then who knows what they're going to do at Kashrus, you see, where they're going to allow non-kosher meat into Israel and so on. Then you have, of course, the army status, where they want to take the people learning in yeshivas or kollel and draft them into the army, you see. And then they're going to tamper with the chinuch system because they want the yeshivas to have whatever they call the core curriculum, you see. They'll go to war with the yeshiva system. And then, of course, which is really very bad, they're going to recognize the Reformed movement as a legitimate movement. And that is the beginning of the end of the Kedusha of the Jewish people. So we could see that they are going to wreak enormous havoc with the Jewish people, you see. Now you talk about darkness, which is incredible. Hopefully it won't happen as bad as I say, you see. So what we're witnessing really, I believe, is the ultimate darkness of the Jewish people in the land of Israel, in Eretz Israel. And this is a very, very important idea, you see. So the amazing thing is that it's actually happening in our time, you see. And I believe this is one of the reasons why God is allowing this to happen, because he wants to accelerate the process. He wants to bring the Mashiach now and stop the rapid decline of civilization, because America is dying. We see that. There's so many different things that are happening in America. You know, the progressives, the liberals, the Democratic Party. And we also, of course, realize the tremendous rise in anti-Semitism, you see, all over the world. We realize that we are in a tremendous tornado of anti-Torah values, you see, and anti-Jewish values. There's a tremendous storm against the Jewish people. So therefore, it's very reasonable to assume that we are basically on the last leg, you see, and that the window, which I had mentioned a long time ago, that evil will be able to dominate tremendously until the end, because for all the reasons that I've mentioned, you see, and that this window gets lower and lower, and therefore it severely diminishes the light, the energy of the spheres, until it's about to shut. And if it shuts, then instantly the universe disappears. But before it's about to shut, because of all the evil, the window, right, the window, right before it shuts, then the Shiurim, the gates of heaven open up, and the entire universe is infused with an awesome light, even though the windows shut. And we are really at that point in time. So certainly let us hope that this is basically the last klipa. This is the last darkness. And that this is truly the darkness of the end. And even Rabbi Yochanan said that I don't want to be here. That's how bad it is and will become. But let us certainly hope that this is the final darkness before the end of time. Any questions? Any questions?
Rabbi, when Israel was created as a country, as a state, like with Menachem Begin and Herzl and all of them, they were also the Erev Rav, and they were also that darkness that we're seeing, and they tried to eliminate the religion and take away all of that from us to bring up this whole. You would think that would have been the same darkness that we're in today, because their ideology is really similar to where we are today.
Yeah, but you have to remember this, that there are many requirements besides the darkness, you see, because when Israel was founded, right, America, this was when, in 1898 or 1899, remember that America had to grow to become Edom, ultimately, you see. And besides that, the Erev Rav did stop their destructive path because Ben-Gurion worked out a status quo with the religious. Because Ben-Gurion, in terms of everything he was, which obviously, tremendous apikoros, but Ben-Gurion realized, he had enough seichel, sense, to realize that he does not want to destroy Judaism. Like he once said famously, I do not want to destroy Yavne. And Yavne, of course, is the place that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai asked Vespasian to allow the Jews, the Sanhedrin, to go to Yavne, and in that way he was able to save Judaism and so on. And Ben-Gurion realized that even though I'm not religious and I'm not interested in it, whatever, he does not want to take away the religion of Judaism, which allowed the Jews to survive for 3,300 years, and is a major cultural, at least that's the way he looked at it, cultural achievement. So he formulated a status quo. And even though it was bad, and they did terrible things, because they took all the Yemenites and North Africans and whatever, and they put them on kibbutzim, which were completely irreligious, in order to get the votes, because he knew that they would not vote for the Mapai. But at least he arranged where they would have a status quo, you see? So it wasn't as bad as what we're seeing today. These people want to go to war with the entire Haredi and destroy the status quo, you see? So when you think about it, we are really at the end. Everything that has to come about has come about, you see? So there is a difference between then and now.
Got it.
Good. Any other questions?
Yes. So if there's a lot of darkness now, what happens once the darkness is filled up to capacity and the window closes, gates open, the Pekidah happens, then what happens?
Well, when that happens, when the gates open, that's it. We will see a light. We will see the divine presence of what we have never seen before. And the beauty of it is that once it comes, it's going to come with staggering light, truth, and holiness, where God himself will be revealed. And that's it. That's the end. And it will never be dark again. And the Jews, of course, will reign supreme until the end, which is the year 2240 or the year 6000. And that begins begins the process of creating Olam Haba. But the main thing is that it's over. It's like somebody being in prison, and all of a sudden the gate is open, or the cell opens the door, and he walks out into the daylight. You can't believe it, you see? And that's what's going to happen. The Golus will be over. The divine presence will be shine forth, will illuminate, and the Messianic, the Mashiach will be here, Mashiach ben Yosef, even before Mashiach ben David, but certainly with Mashiach ben David, they will rule. Look, we don't even understand. We cannot comprehend the freedom, the majesty of that moment. We have no idea. But the psukim in Tanakh say, that the glory will be beyond comprehension. The Ramchal talks about that the glory, the light, the energy, the ruchnius, the spirituality will be something that we cannot even begin to imagine. And it says one of the psukim in Tehillim by David HaMelech that he asks the Rebbe Shem that please give us, for all the suffering that we have done, give us all the opposite. It's unbelievable holiness, because we have endured so much. So that's what's going to happen.
But Rabbi, what happens if they? Oh, you could talk.
What happened? What?
What happens if they succeed in passing all these laws that are abomination in God's eyes, and then Hashem takes His wrath out on everybody?
No, He won't take His wrath out on anybody. I want to tell you something. You have to know one thing. What's important? The Haredim won't. They'll suffer, but they're not the ones who ultimately will be harmed. The Haredim. They'll figure out how to get around it. That's it. They're going to have to make terrible decrees in order to survive. You see, like this whole, like in 2013 when Lapid and Lieberman, whatever, tried to stop the money for the Haredim. What they did is they had to adapt the kollel. I mean, they'll figure out what to do, but the ones who will really be destroyed are the other Israelis, because they're going to destroy the Jewish character of Israel, and they need it. What do they want? Do they want a completely secularized state? They're the ones that will be destroyed, not the Haredim. The Haredim will just retreat into their own Dalar Amos, their own, 4 Amos, and so on, and they'll just continue. It'll be a tremendous hardship, that's true. But it won't harm them like it'll harm the Israeli public, because then Judaism will be destroyed, you see, and that'll be terrible for them. It'll destroy the Jewish character, religion of the entire state. So how are they going to come back? But we don't really know what's going to happen. Will God allow them to do it, even if He wants to have darkness precede the Mashiach? We don't really know. God also, remember, has a limit, like the Mabul, the flood. They also destroyed the world with their terrible, sins and so on. But God said enough is enough, and He wiped out the planet. So there is a measuring, yard in that sense, that they will be allowed to do what they have to do in order to fulfill God. And He will stop it with the redemption itself. You see.
How long, once the gate opens, like how do we know that the divine presence is going to be, like, how much of it is going to be shown to us right away? How do we know that the gate opened? Like, what's the things that we need to look for?
I mean, what's the indicator?
Yes.
The indicator when the gate opens is, first of all, you'll know internally, because you will be a different person. Something will happen to you meaning all of us, to our neshamas, because remember, the gate open is not an event where God appears. No, it's an event where our neshama rejoins God. So how can we not in any way feel that? You see what I'm saying? All of a sudden, it's like the Mersham says in the Pasuk, Umol Hashem es levavchem. God will circumcise your heart, which means He will remove the klipa. But He says your heart means your neshama. So you immediately will be influenced and be affected by that unbelievable rise in consciousness. Automatically. You won't believe what hit you. And it'll be the unbelievable pleasure. You see? So we're not looking here, well, God is going to appear What does that have to do with me? No. When God appears, he will remove the zoyama from your heart, and you will immediately have this unbelievable amount of consciousness, dvekus. You see? That's how you know.
Doesn't the Zohama leave when Mashiach ben David comes? But if the gate opens,
exactly,
so how
that's what he does. Mashiach ben David destroys the Satan. Whether he kills him or he alters the Satan to be a good malach, it's an argument. But whatever it is, he destroys the whole concept of evil, that there is no longer evil or grief or sadness or depression or death, you see, or sickness. It's all gone, never to come back again.
Okay, but when the gate opens, that's a Pekidah. That's when Mashiach ben Yosef comes.
Yes.
So how is so if Hashem's removing the klipa of the Zohama on our hearts when the gate opens, that's when Mashiach ben Yosef comes?
Well, when the gate opens, that will be the Pekidah, because then Mashiach ben Yosef, whoever he is now, will be crowned. He will have the Yechidah of all Jews, you see, and the Shekhinah will go through him into the Yechidah of everybody, because he's got it. It's like a humongous pile of Yechidahs of all the entire Jewish people, and it will go through him into us, you see. And that's what's going to be removing the Zoyama that we have, you see.
So removing of the Zohama will be in stages, like it was in Egypt. It's 49 days.
Well, the whole process is stages. You know, just like we see by Egypt. First there was the Pekidah by Moshe, and then there was a retracing of evil back into the Klippa, right? And then you had the end of that. Then you had all 10 Makkos, one after the other, right? Because each Sphira had to reassert itself. And that's really what the Makkos were. And then, of course, after that happened, you had the unbelievable revelation of Kriyas Yamsuf, which is something we cannot even begin to understand the revelation, the Giloi of that event. And then you had, after that, you had the 49 days, and each day was a Giloi of which we cannot even imagine. And then after that, you had Matan Torah, of what we certainly cannot imagine. You see? Look, what's in store for us is beyond comprehension. I'm not talking, about the guys in a room and there's a 100-watt bulb and then he changes it for a 500-watt bulb. I don't mean that at all. It's not the degree of light that will come down, or holiness, right, is not quantitative, it's qualitative. It's not an amount of a difference in degree. It's a different experience of which we had never seen before. Just like the Jews in Matan Torah. They never experienced, that type of an event where God appeared to them. Like Rashi says, he opened up the heavens and he showed them that he's the Yehuda Shel Olam. He is the one of the entire universe. We don't know what that is. This is not a degree, right? This is the concept of quality, not quantity. So that's what happens when the gate opens. It's like, in many ways, can you walk over to a person who was born blind and explain to him what color is? No. He has never experienced color. He has no idea what you're talking about, you see. But when all of a sudden, if he's able to see and he experiences color, you see, that's not just a degree of revelation. It's an experience which is shocking to him because he cannot even imagine what you were talking about, and now he sees it. Same idea. We are all blind. What do we know? You see? So when our eyes are opened by the Geula, right, the redemption itself, we will be exposed to what he is exposed to, color. And we will be stunned, you see, because it's something that we cannot even imagine. That's what's going to happen by the redemption, you see.
Is the Gilui all equal for everyone, or are there different levels?
Well, there will be a Gilui for everyone. That's called the standard. Then there will be, depending on the person and what he did, there will be levels of Gilui. Yes, but there is a standard, means a minimal amount. But like I say, that minimal amount is comparable to the blind man that sees color. His minimal amount is staggering. And then, depending on the person himself, there will be an additional Giluyim, you see, to that person. And the same thing will happen in Olam Haba. There is a minimal amount, but the basic, that's the basic amount, which is something which is incomprehensible. Because what happens in Olam Haba is infinitely greater than what happens in the Messianic era. Could you imagine what that is? We cannot even imagine the Messianic era. We'd imagine Olam Haba. But then that person, the more deeds that the person has done for the sake of heaven, the greater will be the experience of Olam Haba. So it's both. There's a basic minimum, and then there's the added thing that you get for the mere fact of what you've done in terms of the mitzvahs in Olam Hazeh. So that will happen also by the Messianic era, yes.
And the second Gilui, one that goes according to your level, that happens after Techiyat HaMetim, but the first Gilui will happen during the Mashiach when they come?
Yes, because that's two fundamentally different. The Gilui that you will have by Mashiach ben Yosef, is much more akin to Olam Hazeh that we experience. But after the Zoyama is removed, which happens after Techiyat HaMetim, then we cannot imagine the Gilui, because it's the Gilui without Zoyama. You see, we cannot even begin to imagine what that is. And it was previously experienced by the handmaiden, by Kriya Samsov, because 1/7 of the Zoyama was removed, because out of the 49 days, Kriya Samsov was day number 7, so therefore 1/7 of that Zoyama was removed, and that's what made it so superior to Yecheskel Hanavi. Just that. So could you imagine what the entire Zoyama is removed? And that's what happened by Matan Torah. That the experience was so powerful, the consciousness was so powerful that everybody died. Everybody died. Can you imagine the power of that revelation? Now by us, obviously, nobody's going to die, because there's no Zoyama, there's no Satan to take the life, you see. Because that's what ultimately does it, But like I say, so the Gilui of Mashiach ben Yosef will cannot rival the Gilui of Mashiach ben David, because his appearance is without Zoyama, whereas when Mashiach ben Yosef is with Zoyama, you see. And that eventually will lead, of course, to Techiyat HaMetim by Mashiach ben David. But there has to be a tremendous difference.
So right now we're basically waiting for the window to close, correct?
We are waiting for the window to almost close. We don't want it to close, because then everything disappears.
Right. And then
we want it to go what is called the minimum descent, or I should say the minimum opening of that window, because if it goes beyond that, everything disappears. So we are waiting for it to go to the minimum. Like I said, that's why we need the darkness, right? And then immediately, before it closes, the gates open. So even though the windows close, the gate opens, and that's Mashiach.
And when the gates open, we automatically feel something in our neshama.
Automatically. Oh yeah.
Indicator. And,
yes.
And so before.
Because that's what it says in the Torah. Like I said, Umol Hashem es levavchem. God will circumcise your heart, means He will remove the klipas from that's the end of the Zoyama. So automatically, you're not the same human you were before. You are a different type of human being, you see.
And the Mashiach ben Yosef cannot come before the gate opens?
The Mashiach ben Yosef will come. Well, the Mashiach ben Yosef actually will be here before the gate opens. You see. He doesn't come after the gate opens. He comes before. He's part of the team, if I can use that word, to make sure that the gate opens, or rather to make sure to fight the evil, from descending the window. That's his job. So really, before the gate opens by Mashiach ben David, you see, or even before the gate opens, Mashiach ben, well, it's an interesting Claire. There's no question that the Mashiach ben Yosef arrives before the window can possibly close, because that's his job, you see. But the gate opens basically not by the Pekida, but opens up by the Zechira, which is the second stage of the Giloi. You see, so that will happen.
So then the next step is for Mashiach to come, what's the next part that we're waiting for? What's the next step?
The next step is Mashiach ben Yosef has to arrive and begin to transform the Jewish people. That's the next step. And that's with the Zayamo. Because God will not bring the Mashiach ben David, or the real messianic process, to a nation that is completely in the dark. He's going to make sure that every Jew returns, which we know the pasuk, right? Even if you're outcast, be at the ends of heaven, which I've quoted many times. From there, which means that from the ends of heaven, he will gather you and he will bring you to him. You see, so that's the kuf of Mashiach ben Yosef. So even in Mashiach ben Yosef's time, there will be tremendous revelations. But it won't be as great as Mashiach ben David, because you still have the Zayamo. But it will be phenomenal. No question about that.